In the bustling corporate world, appearances were everything. The CEO of the prestigious company, known for his sharp suits and authoritative presence, was a man of immense power. But today, his father had decided to take a completely different approach. For years, he had watched his son run the company with grace, but he had never truly understood how the employees saw the work they did or how they treated those who weren't in high-ranking positions. His son had built the company from the ground up, but the father had always felt that there was a need for a deep understanding of what went on beneath the polished exterior of the office. So the decision was made. Today, he was going undercover. The father, a man in his late 60s, had spent most of his life in the shadows of his son's business empire. He wasn't interested in the limelight and had always preferred to remain behind the scenes. But today, he was determined to uncover the truth. His son had warned him about the challenges of working in such a competitive environment, but he felt the need to experience it firsthand. So, dressed in an old blue janitor's uniform, he stepped into the building. His once dignified and commanding presence was now hidden beneath the simple, humble attire of a janitor. The plan was simple. He would clean the offices, empty the trash, and blend in like any other employee. He would walk through the corridors, mop the floors, and wash the windows, all while observing the reactions of the employees. The father wasn't here to cause trouble. He was here to understand. He knew the importance of anonymity in this task. His son had told him that the employees would never guess who he was in this uniform. To them, he would be just another worker, another cog in the corporate machine. As he walked into the building, he couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. The place was sleek and modern, with glass walls and shiny floors. It was a symbol of the success his son had achieved. Yet it also felt cold. The glass windows that allowed for an open view of the office from the outside made the space feel like a fishbowl, a place where everything was visible, but also distant. He walked past the reception desk, where the receptionist barely looked up from her screen, and into the hallway leading to the office floor. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for what he might encounter. His plan was to take a few hours to clean the offices, listen to the conversations, and observe how people interacted with him. But what he didn't expect was the immediate sense of invisibility he felt as he donned the janitor's uniform. As he began his task, pushing the cleaning cart down the hall, he noticed that most of the employees barely even acknowledged his presence. He passed by several offices where people were busy in meetings or on the phone, completely ignoring him as he worked. It was as if he didn't even exist. He wiped down desks, mopped floors, and emptied trash cans, all the while trying to remain inconspicuous. But it wasn't just the indifference that caught his attention. It was the way some employees looked at him. A few young workers gave him dismissive glances, their eyes quickly shifting away as if they were embarrassed by his presence. It made him wonder, did they look down on him because of his role? Was this how they treated every janitor or cleaning staff? Did they see him as less than them simply because he was doing a job that they didn't consider important? The father found himself growing more and more uncomfortable with every passing minute. He had lived a life of respect, honor, and dignity. But now, under the disguise of a janitor, he felt like an invisible man, someone whose very existence was disregarded. The employees seemed to be lost in their own worlds, consumed by their phones, laptops, and meetings. Yet none of them seemed to notice the quiet man pushing the cart, moving through the hallways, performing his duties with precision and care. Then, as he entered one of the larger conference rooms to clean up, he overheard a conversation between two employees. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their words reached his ears as they spoke loudly, not realizing he was standing just outside the door. "Can you believe we have to work alongside people like him?" one of them said, referring to the janitors who worked in the building. "I mean, it's just embarrassing. I don't know why we can't hire proper cleaning staff who actually know what they're doing." The second employee chuckled. "I know, right? They're just so disposable. They'll never know what it's like to have a real job, making decisions, and having power. The father stood frozen in place, the words cut deep. He had heard enough. The dismissal, the lack of respect, the casual cruelty. It was more than he had expected. In that moment, his decision to go undercover felt more justified than ever. He was witnessing firsthand the arrogance and disrespect that ran rampant in his son's company. He had always known that a CEO's role was demanding, but he hadn't realized the extent to which the power dynamics within the company made some people feel superior to others. The father wiped the tears from his eyes, though he wasn't sure if they were from the emotional weight of what he had just heard or from the cleaning product he had accidentally sprayed in his face. He took a deep breath and steadied himself. This was just the beginning. His mission had only just started, and what he discovered next would change everything. But for now, all he could do was keep pushing the cart, quietly moving through the halls, and taking mental notes of everything he saw. The truth was becoming clearer by the minute, and it was something he had never expected. As the father, disguised as a janitor, continued his day, he began to observe his surroundings more closely. The initial discomfort had faded slightly, but the reality of what he was witnessing was much harder to ignore. Despite the polished glass walls and sleek offices around him, the interactions he observed were far from polished. The employees, those who appeared so refined in their business attire, were, in many cases, dismissive, indifferent, or even rude. He spent the next few hours moving through the building, quietly performing his duties as if he were just another worker in the corporate machine. The father found himself mopping the floors, cleaning the windows, and emptying trash cans, all while trying to make himself as invisible as possible. However, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the strange looks, the whispered comments, and the way employees behaved around him. It was as if he didn't belong in their world. But to him, the more he witnessed, the more he began to see the cracks in the company's polished image. The first significant interaction he had came when he was cleaning the hallway outside one of the executive offices. A young woman in a sharp business suit walked past him, her eyes quickly scanning the hallway. She barely looked at him, but he could see her sneer. It was fleeting, but it was there, an expression of pure contempt, as if she couldn't be bothered with someone in his position. She didn't even acknowledge his presence as she passed by, despite being so close. The father, still pretending to be just a janitor, couldn't help but feel the sting of that brief moment. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it left an impression on him. But it wasn't just the young employees who treated him this way. The father overheard another conversation in the break room between two middle-aged employees, both senior staff members, discussing the new cleaning staff. They didn't know he was listening, but the words were crystal clear. "I don't understand why we can't get better people to clean this place," one man said, glancing at him as he walked past the break room door. "It's embarrassing. These people are literally just here to sweep up after us. I swear, half of them don't even know how to clean properly." The second man nodded, rolling his eyes. "It's not their fault, I guess. They're just doing a job that no one else wants. But we deserve better than this." Their words cut deeper than the father had expected. He had been a part of this company's success, helping his son build it from the ground up, yet this was how the employees viewed the janitorial staff. The invisible workers who did all the dirty work while others took the credit. There was no respect, no appreciation for the efforts of those who were essential to the daily functioning of the business. To them, he wasn't even a person. He was just a tool, a part of the background. As the father moved through the building, performing his tasks with quiet efficiency, he began to notice more and more employees whispering to one another. At times, he caught snippets of conversations, some of which left him feeling like a stranger in his own son's company. One group of employees in a corner of the office had gathered near a water cooler. They were speaking loudly enough for him to hear as they discussed the cleaning staff, making jokes about the lowly workers who did menial tasks. Their laughter was casual, unbothered, as if they couldn't care less about the people whose jobs they were mocking. Can you imagine having to do their job? Cleaning up after everyone else. One woman said, laughing, "I could never. I'd rather quit." The father stood motionless, pretending to scrub the floors as the laughter echoed around him. The words stung, but he kept his composure. The employees' attitude toward the janitors, the cleaners, the people who kept their workplace in order, was nothing short of degrading. They had no idea the man they were laughing at was, in fact, the father of the very CEO they worked for. The irony of it all was not lost on him. But what bothered him the most wasn't just the casual mockery. It was the absolute disregard for the dignity of the people doing the work. Every time he overheard these conversations, it felt as though a part of him was being insulted. His son had worked so hard to build this company, but the culture that had developed within it seemed to have lost its heart. People had become focused on the wrong things, on status, on power, on material success, and had forgotten about the importance of respect for all workers, regardless of their role. As the day continued, the father felt a growing sense of frustration. He had heard enough. But it wasn't until he passed by an office and heard one employee speaking about the janitors in an openly disdainful manner that he knew he had to take action. Honestly, they should just hire better cleaning staff, the employee said, snickering. It's not even a hard job, and yet they still manage to mess it up. I mean, it's not like we ask for much. The father's heart raced. He had heard enough. The disrespect, the mockery, the blatant disregard for the people who made everything run smoothly. It all became too much to bear. He was no longer just a bystander. He was a part of this system, and he had the power to change it. The father walked down the hallway with a newfound determination. He had seen enough. The employees had shown him exactly what he needed to know about the company's culture. Disrespect was rampant, and the people who were supposed to be leaders had failed to instill the right values in their teams. It was time for a change, and he was going to make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. He was ready to reveal the truth. The employees had no idea who they had been disrespecting, but that was about to change. The father, still in his janitor disguise, walked through the company with a weight on his shoulders. Every step he took seemed to echo louder in his mind, and the more he overheard, the more his resolve grew. He couldn't continue this charade much longer. The disrespect, the indifference, he had seen enough. The employees' attitudes had shaken him to his core, and it was clear that the company he had helped his son build had a long way to go in terms of culture and values. As he walked through the hallways, pushing his cleaning cart, he felt as though he was walking through a different world. He had been a part of this place for years, but now, in this disguise, he was invisible, nothing more than a nameless worker to those around him. It was a stark contrast to the power he held in the corporate boardroom. But today, in this role, he was not a CEO's father. He was just a janitor, and it hurt more than he expected. It felt like he had been stripped of his identity. Yet, the deeper he went into the heart of the building, the more his sense of purpose grew. He had to do something. He had to make them understand. If the employees couldn't respect the people who worked alongside them, how could they respect the company's leadership? The thought of his son running a business in an environment like this troubled him. It wasn't just about the work. There was a lack of respect, a lack of human decency. His time was running out. He had overheard enough, witnessed enough to know that the people who had mocked him didn't even realize the depth of their actions. They were so caught up in their own little world, oblivious to the fact that the person they were demeaning was the father of the CEO. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and that was about to change. As he cleaned the break room, he spotted the group of employees who had been laughing and mocking the janitors earlier. They were gathered around the coffee machine, talking in low voices, their conversation laced with disdain. The father felt the anger bubbling up inside him, but he knew he had to remain calm. He had to be strategic. Now was not the time to lash out. It was time to make them face the reality of their actions. He paused, standing still for a moment, as if lost in thought, before turning to face the group. The employees didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in their conversation. He took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of patience he had left. He was done being invisible. It was time for the truth to come to light. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but firm. The group fell silent, their heads turning in his direction. The father's heart pounded, but he didn't flinch. This was his moment. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation," he continued, locking eyes with each employee in turn. "And I have to say, I'm disappointed." The employees exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to make of his words. One of them, a young man in his 20s, sneered. "What's the problem, old man?" he said, rolling his eyes as if dismissing him. "We were just talking." The father's gaze didn't waver. "No," he said, his voice now carrying an authority that made the young man's smirk falter. "You weren't just talking. You were mocking the very people who keep this place running. The people who clean up after you, who make sure this office is spotless, so you can come in every day and do your jobs." The young man blinked, his expression shifting from arrogance to confusion. "What are you talking about?" he muttered, clearly unsure of how to react. The father stepped forward, the words now coming faster, more urgently. "I'm talking about respect. The way you dismiss people like me, without a second thought. You think your position here gives you the right to mock those who do the work that you wouldn't even consider doing yourselves. But what you don't realize is that I'm not just any janitor." The room was now completely silent. The employees, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stood frozen. The father, though, knew this was the moment when the truth would hit them like a ton of bricks. "I am the father of the CEO of this company," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "The very company that you work for. And I've been watching you, watching all of you, mocking, belittling, and disrespecting the people who do the jobs you deem beneath you." There was a stunned silence in the room. The employees looked at him in disbelief, their faces draining of color. The young man who had sneered earlier opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The shock of the revelation was too much for him to process. "You think this is just a job for some of us," the father continued, his eyes scanning the room. "But let me remind you that respect is earned, not because of your title, not because of your suit, but because of the way you treat the people around you. The people who keep things running smoothly behind the scenes. That's where true leadership lies." The father paused, letting his words sink in. He had their full attention now, and he could see the realization dawning on their faces. They had no idea that the person they had been mocking was the one person who could change everything in their careers with just one word. The tension in the room was palpable. The employees stood there, motionless, as the weight of his words settled over them. The father wasn't angry anymore. He was calm in the knowledge that the time had come for them to learn the hard truth. He had seen enough, and now it was time to make them understand that respect was non-negotiable. And just as he turned to leave the room, he made his next decision clear. It was time to hold them accountable. The father, standing in front of the shocked employees, felt a mix of emotions stirring within him. He had watched the way they behaved, dismissing his presence as a mere janitor, belittling the people who made their work possible. Now, it was time to face the consequences. The room was thick with tension, and as the silence stretched on, the father knew that his next actions would define the company's future. He was no longer just a father or an outsider. He was the embodiment of the company's values, the silent observer who had seen enough. The truth had been revealed, but the real work was about to begin. For a moment, no one spoke. The employees stood frozen in place, unsure of how to react. The young man who had mocked him earlier looked as if he had seen a ghost. His confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a nervous sweat that formed on his brow. The others were equally silent, unable to process what had just happened. They had all been caught off guard, their actions exposed, and they knew that they couldn't just laugh it off or pretend it hadn't happened. The CEO's father, who they had mocked without a second thought, was standing right in front of them, and he had the power to change everything. The father took a slow, deliberate breath, his mind racing as he considered the next steps. It wasn't enough to just reveal his identity. No, there had to be consequences. The disrespect they had shown wasn't something to be ignored. It needed to be addressed, and it needed to be addressed now. He had been watching this company grow for years, but today he was taking a stand, not for himself, but for the dignity of everyone who worked behind the scenes, unseen and often unappreciated. "I'm not here to play games," he said, his voice now calm but firm. "What I've seen today goes against everything that this company should stand for. It's about respect, dignity, and integrity. The way you treat each other, the way you treat people like me. This is not how a successful, respectful business operates." The employees shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at one another, unsure of what was coming next. The father continued, his words carrying the weight of his years of experience in both business and life. "I've worked hard to build this company into something my son can be proud of, something that stands as an example to others. But I see now that there is a culture in this company that needs to be changed. A culture where people feel superior to others, just because they wear a suit or sit in a big office. This is not how things will continue." The father paused, allowing his words to sink in. The room was still silent, but now there was an unmistakable sense of guilt in the air. The employees were beginning to understand that this wasn't just a lecture. It was a warning. "I've already made my decision," the father said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "The employees who mocked me earlier, the ones who laughed and disrespected me without knowing who I was, your actions have consequences." He turned to the group of employees who had been laughing about the janitors. Their faces had turned pale, and they could barely meet his gaze. "I'm sorry," the young man who had mocked him earlier finally spoke up, his voice faltering. "We didn't know." The father held up his hand, cutting him off. "You didn't need to know. What matters is that you showed no respect. And that, my friends, is why I'm letting you go." The room went quiet again, and the employees who had been part of the conversation looked at one another in disbelief. The shock of the announcement hit them like a cold wave. The young man who had spoken was visibly shaken, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words to apologize. But there were no words that could undo the damage. The father turned to the others in the room, his tone shifting slightly. "This is not just about firing people. It's about setting a standard. If you want to be a part of this company, you need to treat everyone with the same respect, whether they're cleaning your floors or running the company. This is a lesson for everyone, including myself. We are all part of something bigger than ourselves, and we must honor that." He let the silence linger for a few more moments before taking a step back. He could see the realization on their faces, the understanding that what they had done was wrong. Some looked ashamed, others stunned, but all of them were beginning to grasp the depth of the father's message. This wasn't just about one bad day. It was about the culture of respect that needed to be instilled in every corner of the company. "And so," the father continued, "I'm giving you all a second chance. This is your wake-up call. From now on, there will be no room for disrespect in this company. Everyone will be held to the same standard. If you want to work here, you'll need to earn that respect every day, in every way." The young man who had mocked him earlier nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "We understand," he said, his voice low. "Good," the father replied, his tone softening just a little. "But remember, actions speak louder than words. It's time to start showing respect, not just to your colleagues, but to everyone you work with. I expect better from all of you. My son expects better from all of you." With that, the father turned to leave, his mission accomplished. The employees were left in the conference room, their minds racing as they tried to process the events that had just unfolded. The father had not only exposed their flaws, but he had also given them the chance to redeem themselves. He had set the tone for the future of the company, a future built on respect, humility, and the understanding that no one was above another. As he walked out of the room, the father couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. His son would have a stronger company because of this. The truth had been revealed, and now it was time for change. The lessons had been learned, and the company would never be the same again.